Hello everybody, and welcome to Spiritual Metaphysics 101. My name is Yaakov and I'm your teacher, the host of the show, and also a student of A Course in Miracles. We're going to start out reading from the book entitled A Course in Miracles. Here's my copy. This is the second edition. There's a third edition out now with some supplemental materials. Reading from A Course in Miracles, Chapter 10, The Idols of Sickness. And I want to focus on the power of the mind and disciplining the mind. And we'll introduce that topic of the power of the mind and disciplining the mind this way. Nothing beyond yourself can make you fearful or loving, because nothing is beyond you. Time and eternity are both in your mind and will conflict until you perceive time solely as a means to regain eternity. Time is solely at your disposal, and nothing in the world can take this responsibility of choosing time at your disposal. God's laws were established for your protection and are as inviolate as your safety. So here the Course is saying that the mind encompasses everything: the cosmos, the astral, the universe, eternity, time, form, duality. Everything is included in the mind. Let's read a little further. God created nothing beside you, and nothing beside you exists, for you are part of Him. Nothing except Him is real. What can upset you except the ephemeral? And how can the ephemeral be real if you are God's only creation, and He created you eternal? Your holy mind, and now we're getting into the topic, your holy mind establishes everything that happens to you. Every response you make to everything you perceive is up to you, because your mind determines your perception of it. So, if the mind is everything, and God created us in His likeness and image within His mind, wouldn't it stand to reason that it would be apropos of us to discipline our minds rather than having scattered thoughts, conflicting thoughts, fearful thoughts, time-based thoughts rather than eternal thoughts? All of this, it says here, is your responsibility. And God gave us the ability to make that choice, to align our thinking and our thought system in the mind with this higher power, the Holy Spirit, the Buddha, and the Tao. God of your understanding then extends through our minds and shines light on everything that we see. There's a wonderful workbook lesson that says God is in everything that I see. Well, it isn't really that God's in it, it's that our minds perceive it through the great rays and the light that's extending through and shining through our minds. And then everything is lit, so to speak. Everything is illuminated. And God is then in everything that we see, because it originates in our minds. Here he goes on to say, God gave you the power to create for yourself so you would be like Him. That is why your mind is holy. And there's another workbook lesson that comes to mind, and that is that my mind is one with God's mind, and I'm very holy. So these workbook lessons integrate so well with the text that I'm reading from. You start to get an understanding of the power of the mind and the nature of disciplining the mind in the text. And then the practical applications come into play in the workbook lessons. Now, I'm suggesting that if you are interested in A Course in Miracles, you read more about it. You can get the book online. You can buy it in bookstores. It's available. It's a wonderful, practical, very empowering text and workbook lessons to discipline the mind and to purify the mind. Now, what I mean by purification is that, and we'll get into this a little bit in this segment, the negative ego thoughts of guilt and sin stand between us and the great rays that are emanating from God. So we don't get that illumination until the obstructions are removed. All of the blocks to the awareness of the great rays and the love have to be removed. And these workbook lessons help us in doing that. But just the understanding that, yes, the mind is all-inclusive, the mind is infinite, and we can tap into that infinite intelligence and light and love that is available because our minds are one with God's mind, and our minds are very holy. We'll just read a little bit further in this. It says, when anything threatens your peace of mind, ask yourself, has God changed his mind about me? Then accept his decision, for it is indeed changeless, and refuse to change your mind about yourself. God has not changed his mind about us and condemned us or judged us, and so we want to likewise not condemn and judge ourselves. And we want to change our minds to undo, as we were talking about, that guilt and that notion of sin in our minds, so that the great rays of light and love can come through, and the illumination then takes away, shines away all of the shadows, the darkness, both in our minds and in the perceptive world that we see, the relative world, the ego thought world. And that is the nature of a miracle, is that shift from shadows to light, from fear to love. God will never decide against you, or he would be deciding against himself. So these are the introductory remarks from A Course in Miracles on the power of the mind and the nature, so to speak, or the importance of disciplining our minds, purifying our minds of negative thinking, ego thoughts, fear thoughts, judgments and criticisms of other people, and I would say even more importantly, the thought of separation from others. You know, there's a wonderful Buddhist idea, and it's taught in A Course in Miracles as well, and that's the notion of interbeingness. As you think of somebody, you're thinking of yourself because you're one. And as you treat somebody else, you'd be treating yourself because we're one. There's that interbeingness. There is that oneness, the unseparated state of consciousness that we want and is called enlightenment. And when we know that we're in that unseparated state of consciousness, then we are truly aligning our thoughts with the great rays and with the love and the light that comes from and emanates as our Creator. So I have another book here that I want to share, and we'll go into this a little bit now. This book is entitled The Buddhist Path, and the subtitle is A Practical Guide from the Tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And we're going to go a little bit further into the discussion of the power of the mind and the disciplining and the purification. Let's see. I want to go here to, here we go. The causes and conditions of the mind. He starts out in this book, this is written by two brothers who are Buddhist monks. And it says, in order to reveal the completeness of the mind, the most important thing to work with is the body, the speech, and the mind. In Buddhism, these three aspects are called the three doors. And then he goes on, or they go on to say, the mind is like a king, and the body and speech are like servants. So we're further along now in our understanding of the power of the mind and the necessity really to know peace. We have to discipline our minds. The mind is like the king, and the body and the speech are like its servants. Then it goes on, since mindfulness supports what is positive, we should try to be mindful in all our activities. Along with mindfulness, we should always try to be honest and compassionate and helpful to others. So then they go on to say, the body relies on the mind. The body is merely temporary and dependent upon the mind. The mind is like the ground. It is more vast and subtle than the body. So I want to emphasize, for those of you that maybe are beginners, the power of mindfulness and the necessity, as we've been talking about, of purification and discipline. The practice of disciplining our minds occurs every day, every waking moment. In our exchanges with other people, in our interactions with people, places, and things, all of it is a classroom in which we can learn mindfulness. As we're eating, it's another opportunity to be mindful. Rather recently, I've been on this journey of weight loss and healthful eating. And for me, it was an exercise in disciplining and purifying the mind. It was amazing how much stuff I had around food as a false idol. It never gave me the peace of God. It never allowed me to know the great rays or the Buddha or the Tao. That was something that subconsciously I probably sought in food or in relationships or in other false idols such as prestige, money, influence, power. All of these things are false idols. And if you recall, the chapter that I started reading in A Course in Miracles at the beginning of this episode is called The Idols of Sickness. So we want to go back into the mind, which is within. That's where the power is available. However, if we haven't learned purification and discipline techniques and practiced them in our everyday lives, then as it says here, the speech and the body are the servants of an untrained mind. And what happens is disastrous. It's suffering. All right, going a little bit further into this book, it says here it is the conscious mind that reincarnates. Mind travels to the next stage, and what it encounters is the necessary conditions for its reincarnation. We are reborn due to ignorance, and once the ignorance is removed through the realization of emptiness, this would be the purification process, we are not forced to reincarnate. So the Course has a very similar, Course in Miracles has a similar ideation, if you will, and that is that we awaken from the dream of the ego, and we no longer are dreaming the dream of exile from heaven. The Buddhists talk about no longer needing to reincarnate in the body and in the world, which is a false projection, if you will, of a unhealed mind. Once the mind is purified and disciplined to the point of purity, where it says you realize the pure emptiness. Well, emptiness means purification. Then we no longer are forced to reincarnate. The impetus of current habits will continue to carry your consciousness to rebirth after rebirth. So the everyday process, the everyday activities, the everyday practice is what is our purpose in life. When I wake up in the morning, I reaffirm that in my mind. Today is an opportunity for me to learn these lessons, purify and discipline the mind, so that I have peace and serenity, and I know the vastness of the oneness of mind. And the oneness of mind means that everything is included in that light and that love, and in the Buddha and the Tao. Well, here it says, emptiness is not the cause of rebirth. Habitual, dualistic grasping causes rebirth. At the same time, emptiness is what makes it possible for things to change. Well, here this book is identifying the solution, and that is the great light. The light comes through from a vast source, but it's only available to us if we practice purification and discipline so that the light is unobstructed. Course in Miracles says we'll remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, and then we know peace. So ignorance blocks our vision in many ways. Ignorance has covered up wisdom to the extent that we do not even understand the way things work at the relative level of cause and effect, which would be the world. So it says, sentient beings are wandering in darkness, unable to see beyond what they can feel. Floating in an ocean of ignorance, where we are tossed about by waves of resentment, fear, and attachment. I think this is essential in an understanding of the enlightenment process. We want to purify the minds so that we're released from our resentments. Forgiveness and love is incredibly important in that process. We want to purify and discipline the mind so that the fear is undone. I'm referring directly to what it says here, floating in an ocean of ignorance. That would be the unhealed mind. We're tossed about by waves of resentment and fear and attachment, false idols. And then they conclude by saying ignorance can be removed. If we understand the causes and effects of ignorance and wisdom, we can work to remove confusion and bring out the inherent enlightened qualities. So I hope you're getting a sense of the consistency of the whole notion of enlightenment. Removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. Undoing the waves of resentment, fear, and attachment. And the disciplined mind can accomplish anything. Of Course in Miracles says an undisciplined mind can accomplish nothing. Well, let's go on a little bit in this book. I bought this recently at a Buddhist temple here in Nashville, and I found it very, very helpful, and I was very pleased to pick this up. So the next chapter is the primordial nature. And again, we're talking about mind, the vastness of the infinite mind. The relative truth of the way things appear may be accurate in our current situation, but it is not the absolute truth of the way things really are. In the natural state of reality, all things are equal. Well, A Course in Miracles talks about undoing the specialness of the ego, where things are unequal. And some are more, some are less. Some are better, some are worse. So here in the Buddhist sense, it says the natural state of reality is all things are equal. The natural state is beyond any ideas we may have, and even beyond our imagination. Once we understand the true nature of the relative level, which would be the ego state, where things are uneven, then we can meet the absolute and reach the absolute level, which is enlightenment. And there you're one with everything. There you're no different from anybody else. The Course in Miracles says you recognize that your brother's needs are the same as yours. His interests are the same as yours. Everything is the same. Now, of course, at the level of relative or bodies, that's not true. Different bodies, different genders, different ages, different races and cultures, all that we understand. But that is not enlightenment. And the body is the servant of the king, which is the mind. Once the mind is trained to the point where we recognize that all things are equal, then we're in a natural state of reality, and we have attained enlightenment. Here's an interesting question. Who is making all these decisions and judgments, it asks? And this is the relative world. Well, who is asking? What is this I? Where is it? Who's doing all the analyzing and discriminating? Our minds. We've chosen a thought system within our minds that is relative, rather than choosing a thought system within our minds that is absolute and vast and infinite, which could be described as the Christ, or the Buddha, or the Tao, the Krishna. So it is the mind that does the analyzing and the discriminating. And we have a choice within our mind to choose either the ego mind or the spirit-based mind. And therein lies the whole difference in our experience of our everyday life, and then our lives that transcend life in the world as we know it. And there is a life past what we know in the world. And this is what we want to rest in and not keep reincarnating in the relative world of ego again, over and over and over. That birth and punishment and suffering and then death. It's a disastrous dream, as the Course would call it. Well, once we know that that disastrous dream can be ended, we're motivated and we want to go for that kind of enlightenment. And in fact, there's another workbook lesson that I want to refer to, and that just happens to be today's workbook lesson, lesson 75 back in A Course in Miracles. And I think that this really makes a point consistent with what we're talking about here. And here's lesson 75. It says, the light has come. The light has come. You are healed, and you can heal. Well, that means your mind. The light has come. You are saved, and you can save. You are at peace, and you bring peace with you wherever you go. The light is shining through your enlightened mind, unobstructed, unencumbered, unblocked, and you then bring the light and the peace wherever you go. Darkness and turmoil and death have disappeared. The light has come. Today we celebrate the happy ending to your long dream of disaster. There are no dark dreams now. The light has come. A new world is born. Now, this makes reference to the way we experience the Maya, or the illusion, or the dream, before full enlightenment, when we release the world entirely and are back into the state of pure oneness. Today we see a different world because the light has come. The world forgiveness offers us. Well, this is a reference to the love. Love transcends all notions of sin and guilt, and it allows us to have a purified, unobstructed mind. The vastness is experienced fully, and then everything is the same. Everything is one. We and them. And that means that the separation notion, that tiny mad idea of separation from the Creator and from each other, is undone. We do not want to see the ego's shadow on the world today. We see the light, and in it we see heaven's reflection lie across the world. The light has come. I have forgiven the world. Keep a completely open mind, washed of all past ideas, and clean of every concept you have made. You have forgiven the world today. The light has come. I have forgiven the world. And the Course is based in so deeply in the foundational teaching of forgiveness. It's a Christian idea as contrasted with the Buddhist idea. But the Buddhists are teaching compassion and loving kindness to purify the mind. So the two are very much the same. Forgiveness to purify the mind, or loving kindness and compassion to purify the mind. Forgiveness entitles you to vision. And vision is that whole idea that we've been talking about of seeing an unobstructed, light-filled world rather than one darkened by shadows. And those shadows are the shadows that are emanating from our own obstructed light in our own minds. So the Holy Spirit never fails to give the gift of sight to the forgiving, because He will not fail you now. Believe He will not fail you now. It is His will, and you have joined with Him. Wait patiently for Him. He will be there. The light has come. You have forgiven the world. And then it has practical suggestions as to the application of the workbook lesson. Remind yourself every quarter hour or so, today is a time for special celebration. Give thanks for mercy and the love of God. Rejoice in the power of forgiveness to heal your sight completely. And once your sight is healed completely and you have true vision, you're then lifted up in consciousness and in awareness, so that you can then know true enlightenment. And what happens at that point is that the world recedes from your perception and from your memory, because it was a false perception and projection anyway, and you know true bliss, you know enlightenment. And we won't miss the world as we knew it. It was a dream of disaster, as it says here. It says you are healed and you can heal, and today we celebrate the happy ending to your long dream of disaster. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't happy moments in the dream as we know it as egos and in bodies, but they're so few and far between. When you really start becoming aware of the workings of the mind and see how fear-based it is, how frightened and full of resentments and full of dark shadows our minds are, then the brief moments of happiness really don't compare. There's only one thing that gives us the pure bliss and joy that we're entitled to, and that is in our inheritance, and that is God's love, the Buddha's love, the flowering of the oneness and vastness that incorporates all things, all sentient beings. And separately, we only have snatches or glimpses of pleasure and happiness. But when we're one with everything, then we're in a state of bliss. Now, the Buddhists teach that the meditation is the way to that. Of Course in Miracles teaches that it's more contemplative. You're contemplating the nature of forgiveness, and you're extending that forgiveness in that light. But it's very much, similar. Well, concluding with this workbook lesson, here's an interesting application. Should you be tempted, say to anyone who seems to pull you back into darkness, "The light has come. I have forgiven you." The light has come. I have forgiven you. We dedicate this day to the serenity in which God would have us be. Celebrate the beginning of vision and the sight of the real world, which would be light-filled, forgiven, which has come to replace the unforgiven world you thought was real. Well, I hope that this workbook lesson and the earlier reference to the chapter on the idols of sickness, and then the book, The Buddhist Path, have been helpful in our conversation today. On a personal note, and then we'll close this episode, I would say that the more I read, the more I meditate, the more I practice, the more I interact with the three doors that was referred to earlier, the three jewels, which would be the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. I engage with others in a community, in a fellowship, and I practice the wisdom that's being taught through the Buddha. And in A Course in Miracles, there are conference calls I'm able to get on, and there are group meetings that we can join in. And there we have, again, access to the unanimity and the equanimity that comes with pure oneness, pure grace, and pure forgiveness and love, so that there are no differences in separation. So I thank you again for joining us today. There's a lovely workbook lesson that ends with, "I am as God created me. You are as God created you. Namaste, shalom, and peace." Thank you, and we'll see you next time.